We are live. Our webinar is starting now. Tervetuloa. Welcome everyone to our webinar about how to extend your IT organization with top remote developers. My name is Leo Laitinen and I am the Managing Director of Viabill Group in Finland, leading our Finnish branch here. I'm really excited to introduce our today's session. Thank you everyone for joining today, wherever you are in Finland and the world. Our group CEO, Søren Rosenmeier, will soon start the webinar and share his knowledge and presentation on today's topic. Later, we will have Agreena CTO, Allan offer his experiences and thoughts on the topic as well. The reason why we want to share some of the benefits and best practices on extending your IT organization with top remote developers is because we here at Viabill Group understand the importance of finding and hiring the right talent for your organization. We hope that you can consider and hopefully use some of the best practices and tips that we share today. By the end of the webinar, we will have a Q&A session. We hope that we will inspire you today to make the most successful hires abroad. Feel free to post your questions during the webinar as well. We will make sure to answer them at the end of the session. Thanks again for tuning in. I think it's time to get started. So I will give you Søren the time at this point.
Thanks a lot, Leo, and welcome to all of you. My name is Søren Rosenmeier, and I will be presenting, and I will just share my presentation here so you can see it. So the topic of today is how to extend your IT organization with top remote developers. And I think when you look at it, the most important thing in almost any organization is what people you have. And for me, if you're able not only to hire just around maybe a radius of, let's say, 50 kilometers around your office, but if you're actually able to hire from anywhere or within certain time zones, it means that the potential of who you can hire is so much bigger. And I think that is an organizational superpower if you can actually do that. And that is what this webinar is about. So the agenda is that we will start by looking at some different perceptions of remote work and organizational structures. Then we will look at a model that we have made called the hierarchy of needs for remote development, basically looking at what do we need to have in place in order to be good at using remote developers and having a distributed organization. Then we will have the key learnings from Allan. Allan has a lot of experience in this area, so that is highly interesting. And then we'll look at implementing remote teams. So if you want to do this, what do you actually need to do? And if you have already started doing this, what could be some tips for you in the process of implementing remote teams? And then in the very end, we will look at what is our services toward this, how can we potentially help? And then we'll also have some content for your inspiration. So what has inspired us in making this webinar, and if you're interested to know more about this topic, there are some super cool tips there. And in the very end, we'll have a Q&A session. Remember, after this webinar, you will have a recording of the webinar will be sent to you. So there's no reason to kind of take notes for everything. And along with the recording, there's also sent an ebook, which basically says pretty much the same as I'm saying here, but just in more details. And there's also a lot of more tips for different tools and stuff you can use. So I recommend that instead of taking notes of exactly what I say, then maybe have still a place where you can take notes, but instead think, what ideas do you get for your own organization, and then write them down. So let's start off by looking at what we call the future of work, some of the macro trends that is happening right now. And one is remote work in general. And this is heavily accelerated by COVID-19 that has really changed this theme for almost any company. And today, remote work, it's no longer a benefit, but it's something that every company have to make up their mind. What is our attitude towards remote work? Second is the entire trend towards being independent, towards being freelance. This is something that in the 15, 16 years of existence of Right People Group, we have seen that so many more of the best people, especially in IT, has turned toward being freelance. And today, also accelerated by COVID-19, we see that some of the best people in, for instance, Eastern Europe, Southern Europe, they are going freelance. And instead of just looking at customer in their own region, they're basically tapping into a pool of European or even global customers. So there's a huge trend also happening right now in these places like Southern Europe and Eastern Europe. The last one is collaboration, also again accelerated by I would say the entire cloud movement, but also by COVID-19, that today most organizations have a shared collaboration platform like G Suite or Office 365, so they can easily do meetings and have chats internally and etc. So this happened a lot in the last 2 years with regards to having this collaboration, having the tools set up for collaborations and for remote work. And what does these things mean for you? I think the key is that now is actually the perfect time to start building distributed organizations, because there's a huge amount of talent you can tap into, and things are ready for it. So this is what this webinar is about. How do you actually tap into it? So let's start by just looking at different organization models, different perceptions of remote work. So the first one we called no remote, and this, remember, this was quite common before COVID-19, that you have to be on site all the time, and it's a clear exception if you were to work remotely. Today, I would say it is not the norm. Most companies would allow at least some kind of remote work, and if it is, if you have a clear no remote policy, then it's normally due to management beliefs that people are simply way more efficient if they are on site in the office. Second is what we call remote tolerant, and this means that you can do some remote work, but it's still seen as a perk, like something you get. And in that, there is also an assumption that working remotely is more inefficient than being on site. And that also means that if you're thinking in this way, then you don't really have the processes and the structures set up for being efficient when you work remotely. The third one is something that we see quite a lot with larger organizations in Scandinavia, that there is multiple location, and this can be combined with remote tolerant or even no remote. But we see a lot in terms of development, a lot of nearshore centers. It could be in Poland a lot, or in Hungary, Bulgaria, Portugal. So if you have this type of organization where you have multiple location across borders, then you also have to have some structures in place with regards to working with people that are not in the same physical place like you. The fourth one is what we call remote teams, and that is the focus of this webinar. And it basically means that you have some people working in an office and you have other people working completely remotely. This is getting quite standard, and yeah, this is what we will, after this slide, this is everything we'll be talking about, is how to do this in the best possible way. The fifth one is also quite interesting. It's what we call all remote, and there are actually very, very few companies that are organized in this way where everything is happening remotely. But we have some companies like GitLab, Zappos, for instance, that are very, if you read a lot about this topic, they're very famous for how they're set up, especially GitLab maybe. And we also have some content from them in the inspiration part. They produce really good content about exactly this. But the concept is basically that you have a total virtual organization where people can work exactly where they want, and then potentially it's combined with meeting physically once per year, twice per year, or something like that. So let's dig further into the remote teams model. We'll just start with a recap of the definition. So the definition is that some employees work fully remote and others work in one or more physical offices. And that obviously has some pros and that has some cons, and that is what I will focus on now. So if we look at the benefits, then for me, the huge benefit of this is that you can tap into a global talent pool. It's simply an amazing thing that you can source from where people are, and it will give you a much broader selection of what people and what skills you can get into your organization. Second is that you have increased flexibility. If you implement actual remote work, your existing workers will have increased flexibility to do different types of work where they find it to be done most efficiently. And that if you have the right people and do it in the right way, then in my opinion, this is something that will definitely increase efficiency. Sitting in a large, for instance, open office is not, and especially not for all types of work, the best solution. If people value this, and most people actually do, and many people find it to be a must nowadays, then it can also lead to higher employee retention. People can save time in transportation, and it's just, it's a big thing for many people that can keep them at your job, and that can make them change if they do not have this. So these are some of the important benefits, but obviously this is not an easy thing to do well. So if we look at what is some of the key challenges, then one is communication. So when you have people that are on site, potentially you are also yourself on site with them, and you have other people working remotely, then it is super important that you don't leave out the remote people out of the important communication. So you need to ensure that the people working remotely, they get all the important information and communication in general. Second is limited social inclusion. So you have to be very attentive to that you include your remote teams, partly professionally, but also socially. And this is not an easy thing to solve. But one thing is, for instance, to set up one-to-one meetings with them and kind of ensure that you try to include them to the best of your ability. Third one is favoring the on-site team. And I think it's quite a natural human reaction that the people you are around physically, those are also the people you trust the most, because those are the people you know the best. And when you are promoting people, etc., then it is very easy to favor the people you trust more, meaning the people that are in the same physical location as you. So be very attentive to that and make sure that your people in the remote teams, they have the same opportunities as the people that are working on site. And you can say, we can sum it up as that when you have people working on site and when you have people working remotely, then you have two ways of working. And you have to make it on the premise of those working remotely. That is the core fundamental step that you have to have. That now it's not that you do everything on site and then you include them for some very special things. Now they have to be included in everything, and then you can do maybe some few exceptions where you do things on site when they're not included. So that is the key part. And you can say this is a stand that we take. This is what we think. But we think in order to be really successful with the remote teams model, then you also have to set your on-site people free. We do not think it works to say those people can work fully remotely exactly how they want, but the on-site people, they have to be in the office at least 4.5 days per week, for instance. We think that in order to be successful with this, you have to trust people. You have to trust that they will do their very best. They will do the work to the best of their ability, no matter where they are. So let's jump to the next one, and this is what we call the hierarchy of needs for remote development, and it's basically a model that we have made, inspired by Maslow's hierarchy of needs that you might know. But what this model is that it mentions 6 points that are important to have in place in order to be successful with the remote teams model. And the more in the bottom, the more crucial it is for success. So I will go through them one by one, and there will be some specific tips for each one. So first one, efficient recruiting and quality assurance. This is in the very bottom, because what people you get in is just crucial. If you don't have the right people in, then it will fail. So the first tip here is to ensure a broad candidate reach. So you need to, when you look for people to join your team, then you need to make sure that you have a broad exposure, so you have many people to choose from. And this is also a place, I'll get to that in the end, but this is a place where we can help. We're very specialized in going out broadly in the entire market. And second is to have a great quality assurance process. And that means from all the people you can choose from, how do you secure that you choose the best one? And that can be a combination of tests and interviews, etc. But the key thing for us here is to include the team members that will work together with the person working remotely when hiring them. And that there are 2 reasons for this. One is to have their professional opinion. Could be a software developer, then you have a software developer from your team assessing or trying to assess how good is this person actually, so that you get the most qualified quality assurance that you possibly can. But the second reason is that if your team members has been a very important part of the quality assurance process and they have said yes to this person, then you are also 10 steps ahead when it comes to including the new person in the team. So that is it's a must-have, in my opinion, that you include the relevant team members in the hiring process. The fourth one is to the people you hire, that you prioritize that they have experience with remote work, and also preferably that they have a preference for remote work. It is a discipline to be able to work as a you can say a fully remote employee, and it's not for everyone. I remember in COVID-19, many people, they got problem, in the long run, but for some people it is perfect. And those are the people that you need when working remotely. Point here is about ensuring legal compliance. If you hire permanent employees, then you can use different services like deal.com, for instance, to get the contractual in place. If you hire them in a B2B contract, for instance, through us, then it's a bit more simple. If it's through us, then we will handle all this. And then the last point is about the writing and documentation skills. And if you, which most of our customers do, hire in, you can say, fairly in the same time zone, then you can still do video meetings exactly like if you were in the same physical location. But still, when working fully remotely, there will be more written communication. And therefore, it is important that people are skilled in written communication and documentation. So these were some tips about recruiting and quality assurance. And we will now jump to the next one, IT and infrastructure. And I think most companies, they are in a good place with this. And I'm sure that when you join this webinar, then you are some kind of a modern thinking company that have a fair setup of this. But the first point is to have a shared collaboration platform so that you can actually work together in documents, that it's easy to have video meetings, that you have a good communication channel like Slack or similar. So have those collaboration platform in place. Second is, of course, super basic, but also super important. And that is, of course, it's easy to see in your own office whether you probably have good internet connection there. But the people you hire, they also have to have good internet connection, or at least be able to get good internet connection. That is just crucial. And the third one is, how is the workplace actually? Like, you should ensure that they have a really great place to be, and that can be in their own home, their own home office. Maybe you can sponsor chairs, desk, whatever. It can also be potentially, we do that with some, that they get access to a office space nearby. So find out what is the right one for the individual and ensure that it's working for them. A fourth one is also something where technology makes it now quite easy and quite cheap. There are some good solutions for how you include remote people in your physical meetings. So when you have physical meetings, and I think when you are working together in a physical location, then you also should have physical meetings together, but ensure that it's easy and it works when you include remote people in those meetings. Third one is what we call the remote-friendly communication. And the first thing is to ensure equal management attention. So as I shortly touched upon before, it's very human nature to focus more on the people that you are physically together with. So therefore, you need to have extra attention to putting up structures. Could be one-to-one meetings, or that you get a structure for how you ensure the same management attention to those people working remotely. So this is a potential way of doing this, and I think those one-to-one meetings, they should be professional, but they should also be social. So I think when you're meeting virtually, then there's a higher tendency that you go straight to the professional part. And I think working together and what binds people to a company and what binds people together is also the social things that are happening in a workplace. So try to your best of your ability to not only make these one-to-one meetings professional, but also include some, hear how their families are, hear how things are going, etc. Third one is to design a great onboarding process. This is also super important for people working in the same physical location as you. But the thing is that it's harder with remote people. So you should really think about how do they get access to all the right tools, etc. right away? What do they need to know before they start? Kind of really think about this and make a document for exactly how you onboard different types of people that are working remotely in your organization. And that also is combined with this one to document your work processes. And you don't have to start off by making a 200-page document, but try to document the most important work processes and use that in your onboarding processes. It is a great way also for you to think about how you actually do stuff. So also for process improvement, it is actually a super interesting task to try to document what is it actually you do, which tools do you use for what, stuff like that. So that is part of, you can say, the transformation to being a company that can use people from wherever they are. IT supported development processes. First thing, this is not possible for all companies, but if it is, then it can be quite an advantage to have 100% cloud-based setup. Second is, in terms of software development, if you establish what you can call like modern software development, where you have DevOps, CI, test automation, those things in place, these are things that make it easier to work remotely and be on the same page as those working physically on site, because you can say things are locked in online, modern, good structures. Third one is very practical tips. There's also some recommendation for tools in the ebook, but you can say one part that can be really, really hard to replicate in remote meetings and remote collaboration in general is creativity. Like, how do you make creativity sparkle? That is something that often happens between two people or in a group of people. And I've tried it where it really, really works well when working virtually together. And one important step can be to have a good whiteboard tool right at your hand where you can actually draw stuff and talk about them. Like things can happen that you have probably tried in physical life around a whiteboard that can be super good for sparkling creativity. And it's not the same thing in remote meetings. This thing, I think it will be hard to replicate 100%, but you can go a pretty long way with having the right tools for this. Fourth is a general focus on creating great mock-ups, so you have a visual foundation for how you talk about requirement changes, etc. I think that this is important in general, but even more important when working with remote people. So fifth, we have culture. So the first thing is that you should not think of this as just hiring a remote employee or hiring a team of remote employees. This is the way to scale your organization. This is a new opportunity for how you need to scale your organization. And if you are, for instance, let's say you are a head of development referring to a CEO, then you need to make sure that the people above you, they also understand this and support this. That these are not just, you can say, robots that you hire to execute what you think. This is a new way of building an organization. And this is, in my opinion, how you should perceive it and how the management in general should perceive this. Second thing is to document your culture and values, to simply document what is it that you like as a company, how people behave, and how do you not like that people behave. And if you are Finnish people around Finnish people, then of course there's a larger unity around what is commonly accepted. But across borders, it's just different. And I think it's a very good start to try to document what behavior is it that you actually want. And that should also be included in training and in onboarding these cultural stuff and values. And I think you can say, as I said in the beginning, also with the remote, it's often a management belief that when people are not on site, they will not really work efficiently. But if you think about it, then in knowledge companies, it's not people actually want to be efficient. So this is, when you start this is also a good time to think about, okay, how can we actually help people to work more efficiently? And there are some super good techniques out there like Pomodoro or getting things done. We have done getting things done in Right People Group, and it's some real eye openers in terms of how you can actually prioritize and get things done, as they say. Purpose, the last one. I think if remote employees, also on-site employees, but especially maybe remote employees, if they can connect to your purpose, it means that there is from the very beginning a connection between them and the company that makes it more than just an exchange of time for money. So it's a great advantage if the remote employees, they are actually excited about the purpose of what your company does. And there are some good frameworks that you can potentially look into, like OKRs, that are basically trying to break down the purpose into more specific parts, and you can say democratizing the talk about what it is, what our purpose is, and what we are practically doing to fulfill that purpose. And there are also some great tools, as for instance, something called LeapSum, and there are other tools that you can look into. There's more about this in the ebook, how you can say, engage people in the purpose of the company. So that was going through the 6 layers in the hierarchy of needs for remote development. And we will now show a clip of a recent recording from Allan that will give you his views and share his experiences. So we will just pass it along to Allan.
CTO and Agreena. So I will tell a little bit about the experience we have running. I would call it a remote hybrid setup. A little bit about Agreena. We are today almost 100 people and still growing. Actually, this picture is from May, so not really representing the size we have of the company today. But this is part of actually working in Agreena. We have 2 co-working weeks every year. That's the ambition, where everyone working remote will come to our headquarters in Copenhagen and basically work together for a week, establish social connections, do all the things that is hard online on a video meeting. And that's kind of part of the setup we have. We have a staggering number of 30 different nationalities in the company, still counting. We have a headquarters in Copenhagen, and I would say it's probably 1/3 of our organization sitting in Copenhagen. Rest is sitting either fully remote or in what we would call a hybrid setup, where you are in the office a few times a month. So just quickly about Agreena, we work within agritech, fintech. And it's probably talks a little bit into the you can say the mission and the value that Søren talked a little bit about. We actually do a very noble thing about making the world we live in a better place, and we do that by having a carbon certificate program for farmers in order to support them from moving from conventional to sustainable farming, and rewarding and helping in that transition. So and basically turning their farmland into carbon sinks, and looking at the environmental challenges we have around us right now. I think that's a very noble and easy mission to buy into, and I think that is something a lot of adult people can relate to. We are Danish founded. Our market is currently Europe, and not saying that we will not be outside Europe, but that's our main focus right now. A little bit about myself. I worked within internet companies since early 90s or mid 90s. So basically from the get-go of World Wide Web in Denmark. I have been inside out of startups, corporates over the years. So I would say I probably know a little bit about both sides of things in both big corporate setups and small startups. The last 10 to 15 years, I've been really working about establishing remote or cross-border teams. I've been through all the different modes that has been over the years: offshoring, nearshoring, outsourcing, remote hubs, and now in a more fully remote setup. But what would the motivation really be for us to go remote? And I think that's something that is important to ask yourself before you dive into this, because there's some consideration you need to do upfront. I mean, do you, as a leader, trust people sitting remote doing the work, or do you feel more comfortable that you can see them sitting in office at their laptop, churning code or whatever their task is all day? I mean, if you cannot establish or have that trust by default, either you need to find a way to find that trust, or find someone to run a setup that has that trust, or this is simply not for you. I have seen remote setups that has been done through surveillance, basically having people sit with webcams on all day, etc., etc. And I can tell you that's not the way. You will not get happy people working like that, and it will basically, you will take a hit in your both in your performance and quality, etc. And forget about retention. People will leave as soon as there's something else. But as Søren also talked a little bit about, I mean, this is really about trust game. So the trust is very easy to gain through basically recruiting the right people that fits into this. And seniority is one of the very, very easy ways to do this. People who has both been, say, in adult working situation for quite a few years, preferable even being remote. I mean, it's just a little bit easier to trust that people actually are performing the tasks that you would ask them to. And I can always say now, if the motivation is to save costs, I would not really recommend this. I think that's been the case of all the different models we've had over the years: nearshoring, offshoring, remote hubs. You don't save anything; you end up spending the money elsewhere. This is just in my world a fact. You will probably end up spending it in establishing, trust in, and moving these people maybe to your office, etc. So it'll be other places where you end up in spending the cost. And just be aware, you are not the only one looking at establishing remote setups. This is basically everyone right now. If we talked about in the beginning of COVID, I mean, that at that time, remote was so new. When you were actually working with remote teams at that point, it was not a big competition from the market to find employees working in that model. Today, it's very hard. So just be aware of that. And that also dives a little bit into the cost part. You are not competing. So if you're finding a remote developer sitting in Poland, you are not necessarily competing with a local Polish company. You may actually be competing with global leaders like Facebook and Google, Amazon, etc. So basically, you are competing on global salaries. So keep that in mind. So our key motivation for this, as Søren said, reach into a global market. It's so hard to find people. We have a headquarters in Copenhagen. Competition is fierce on good talent in Copenhagen, and you just get so limited by only being able to recruit in a radius around your headquarters. So with this, you can basically just expand that. And also, in my experience, when you find the right people that match your mission and the road ahead of you, you really find talented, motivated people out there, even if they sit in our country. In our setup, I mean, this has actually not been part of, you can say, the motivation in the beginning, but has become it over time through the experience. The diversity simply just gives us in the end better solution. So, as I said in the beginning, we have a lot of different nationalities in our company, and when you have one nationality dominating your setup, it's usually the decision making out of that nationality that basically dominate how decisions are made in the company, and that's not always to the better. I'm Danish, so I can be allowed to say that if it's 20 bitter, grumpy old Danes making decisions is probably not the way decisions are made in other nationalities. And by having that many nationalities, everyone just dial a little bit back on the sharp edges and the edging elbows, giving more space for good discussions, and in the end we just get better solutions because there's so much more input on the solutions we do. And also we're not focused on primarily on Denmark. We are a global focused company, and it's just so much easier to have a global focus if you have a global staff. You have a tendency of actually have a very strong focus on your home market if you're dominating. Your staff is dominated by a local staff. And finally, we are not fully remote. I mean, we have a headquarter. We have people going to the headquarter every day because that's their preference. But we also have people working like a more hybrid setup. So as you probably see, I'm actually sitting remote today because that gives me the peace and quiet to actually do this instead of being in a meeting room where people knock the door all the time. And that's basically how we do it. I think you need to kind of be really upfront how you want to operate it within your company, so you kind of have a policy on this, so it doesn't just become something that happens. So I think it's really important to be upfront setting that up. So how is it just to operate this setup? Recruitment, of course, it's a big question. Recruitment just doesn't happen automatically. Unfortunately, it's not just about putting a job ad on your homepage and then magically remote people fly in. It's a tough job. It's as tough as it is recruiting on other platforms. It's just you have so much more, you would say, geography to recruit on, and I think you have to be aware of that. So you need to make a strategy on how you handle that. Different countries have different platforms to operate on. You need to really be aware of what you want to. What are the constraints you want to recruit within? What languages do you want to support? Do we have time zone constraints? Because maybe your staff has like a window of working hours. That could be more efficient if you have like a limit on the time zones. We do a plus minus 3 hours time zone in order to be able to coordinate things and plan meetings. Then of course there's all the legal and compliance constraints. GDPR. If you are working in a highly regulated setup, it just becomes a little bit harder to operate this, and you will need to look into how that works within your company. Contracting and versus employment goes a little bit into the legal space here. Employment across border, it's a very big gray zone where you could say the laws basically can't keep up with the trends. So you will need to seek some legal counseling on how to do this, and you will probably also need to push them a little bit because they will probably say no. That's how it works. But basically, that is one of the big tasks up front to actually figure out setting this up. There are companies out there that can help you on payroll across countries, even though you don't have entities in different countries. So there are companies specializing in that now. Again, a little bit of security requirements. I think it's mostly regarding if you are working in, especially in fintech or financial services and alike, you just need to be aware of how do you actually operate a very hard regulated area. That may be a very big constraint in how you do this. So in our setup, we provide laptops for our employees, no matter where they are. That itself is a little bit of a logistic nightmare, especially when it comes to Windows machines. It happens to be that Mac and Apple have global distribution, so it actually makes us very easy for us to ship Mac hardware around to the locations that we required. Windows a little bit tougher, but it's something that you need to take into your consideration about setup, whether you provide hardware or not. Again, going into the security part of this. I think one of the most important thing is, though, how will the remote setup be integrated with your company? We operate what I would call a remote first setup, even though we are hybrid setup, but all our team meetings are set up so that everyone sitting remote gets information at the same time as people sitting in the office. I think it's a very dangerous setup to have the remote setup as an add-on. People will not feel connected to the company, and they will feel that they get the information too late, or decisions are already made when they get them. A simple thing as when you go into a meeting, don't stand around the coffee machine doing all the chit chat, go too late to the meeting, and all the decisions are made at the coffee machine. And when you go into the meeting, all the people sitting remote were actually already left because they didn't know where you are, and well, the decision's already made anyway. So you really need to get it under the skin of the entire setup and all your employees, that remote people are actually as important as people in your office. We do, as I said, twice a year we do a co-working week. I will really recommend that. The social bonds you do on those are something people will take home and make it much easier for people to cooperate. It's hard to see how people actually act over a camera. You don't necessarily see body language and so on. Having had a chat in a more social setup, it just changes the way people cooperate, and things just happen to be more smooth and going forward. That's a little bit about how we run the setup.
Thanks to Allan for this super interesting contribution. And we will just head back to my presentation and talk here in the end about actually how to implement the remote teams model, and then we'll proceed to some content for inspiration, and in the end we'll have some questions. So we made a simple 3-step model here: prepare, design and document, and go. And I will just give you some tips for each of these phases, and it can be used if you are considering starting on this journey, but I hope we can also give you some tips if you are already on this journey. So first one, prepare, is if you have somebody in your network or similar that has actually tried this, then try to team up with them. We can also help you in finding an expert that have, like, for instance, a person with the similar experience like Allan, or that can be a sparring partner in this journey. And then I think you should try to assess your remote maturity, like where are you actually how ready are you actually for this, and then start improving the point where you're not ready. And then, as Allan also touched upon in his presentation, you need to decide your remote model. Like, for instance, how many time zones do you want to work across? Will you meet physically? What is your decision on those important parameters? So some questions to ask here is, first, I think a very interesting question, like, how are you culturally different? Because we tend to think in the way that those people working remotely, they are culturally different, and of course they are from us, but we are also culturally different from them. So I think if we look at, you can say, my people, Danes, then we have a different perception of hierarchy than in most other. That is also a general Scandinavian thing, but maybe special for Danes, that we have a much more tendency to disregard hierarchies, and that can be very strange for other cultures. We also expect a high level of proactivity, that people, they speak out their opinions. So that is for Danes, and I've had the pleasure of working with fairly many people from Finland, and that has actually been a huge pleasure for me, Leo as an example. But I also know that, Finnish people, they are culturally different also. So I think that is a really interesting question to ask yourself, what makes you different? Second is very basic, but super important. Can you run all communication in English? Can you document everything in English? And the people that are, having the interface with the developers, are they actually good in English? Can they also be, you can say, creative in English, for instance? How many time zones do you want to work across? It makes a big difference whether you have, for instance, people in Eastern Europe, Southern Europe, maybe 1 or 2 hours difference, versus if you have people in India or China. There's a big time gap, US, similar. So that is something that we normally recommend to keep it within a few time zones. Very interesting point here is when your current employees, they work remotely, what problems do you have? They can be a part of assessing your remote maturity to say what problems do we actually face, and then see why you face those problems and try to fix them. And then I would say in this journey, same as in the hiring process, but include key employees, get their perspective. What do we need to do to prepare this and get them on board? Because it will make you prepare better, but it will also get people with you in making this a success. And then I think in evaluating, you can say assessing your remote maturity, you can use the hierarchy of needs for remote development that I just went through. There are also some other tips in the ebook for where like frameworks you can use to test this. And so that is basically, you can say, the preparation phase. And then if we proceed to the design and document phase, then it's basically, you can say, key point in this is to create your recruitment and your quality assurance process. How do you actually want to do this? And same with your onboarding process. How do you exactly onboard people? You need to write these things down and have a good and well-structured process. And there's also other processes that varies from company to company, what is relevant. But if we look at some examples to the right here of what documents that could be potentially interesting for you to make, then it is 1, your recruitment process. How do you do that? 2, your onboarding process. 3, collaboration tools. And that might be basic, but try to write down actually what tools do you use for what, because that can be a big help to new people, that they're not insecure about whether they need to do what. So say, this we normally do on Slack, this we do here, this we do there. Culture and values that I also touched upon earlier. What do you value as a company? What behavior do you want? What behavior do you not want? And I think a very important aspect here when working across borders and remotely is to touch upon proactivity, because it can be a huge thing if you have the expectation that people are very proactive, but maybe they come from a setup where proactivity is not wanted, and meaning that you should just do what you're told, but maybe you expect them to say if they think things are wrong or etc. So have that discussion with them already, actually in the recruitment process. Do they really understand what you mean by proactivity, and are they capable of doing that, or is it simply, say, too deep in them to not work in that way? So document what you want and what you don't want, and discuss this very early on, and also in the hiring process. And then in general, document your processes and your best practices. Include your best people in creating the best practices. That's also a way of actually appreciating them, to say, we think you're doing this extremely well. Could you help us to make a best practice for the company? It's a way to get people on board this, and it's a way to actually document who you are and what you do as a company. This is a very practical tip. There are more practical tips like this in the ebook, but if you have a lot of documentation or documents that are in Finnish, then you can use dbel.com for translating document. It works really, really well. It's where AI has really evolved, and it's super good. When you start hiring, then ensure to adjust the processes with the new developers, especially if you follow our advice and hire senior people. Then you can learn a lot from them, and that is what this is about, that you start in the right place and then you improve from there. So I touched upon also this before, but equal management attention to remote team members, ensure that, and include them. What do your new hires think you can do better in the process? What is their perspective? So learn from them, and then if you think something is not right, then make sure to communicate it immediately. That is the only way to go. If you leave it, it will only get worse. So that was the implementation model. It can also be found in the ebook. And now we'll just look shortly at how Right People Group can help. So we basically help in the bottom of the pyramid. So we help by finding the right people. And our goal is to make it super easy for you to get the best developer in a simple and hassle-free process. And the way we do it is that we talk to you, understand your company and what you need, and then we simply execute our processes. We have a special, what we call a hire from anywhere function, that is super specialized in finding remote developers, but also other types of IT people. And then we do personal interviews with candidates, and we ensure that we think they are right for your role and for your company. And then what we send to you is basically a CV, but also how we think they fit, also including if there are places where we think they do not fit. And sometimes we also include a video presentation, so you have an idea about, if you spend an hour of your life talking to them, who will you actually meet, what is their English skills, etc. So that is our process, and you can say 5 traits of our service is 1, it's fast. We have the setup for doing this, so we normally deliver candidates within 3 business days. It's compliant, so when you have the contract with us, you have a simple B2B contract with us, and we invoice you every month based on the contract. And quality is key for what we do. Everything is a combination of price and quality, but we only deliver candidates that we think are really skilled software developers or IT consultants. So quality is first priority for us. Hassle-free, we try to make it as easy as possible to work with us. And one thing is that we only present candidates that we actually truly think are fit. If we are in doubt, then we don't present it. And last one is that it's risk-free. So it means that when you say to us, we would like such a developer with these and these skills and to do this and this, then we execute our process. And only if you hire that person, you pay anything. So there's no fee or anything for making us do our work. And you are very, very welcome to do your own process on the side. So only if you find that our candidate is the very best, then you choose that. And then our payment is included in the price we present to you. So there are no fees whatsoever, except for the price you actually pay when you hire the candidate. So we normally work with an hourly rate. So that was about our service, and now we are at 59 minutes, so almost an hour. But we will still go to the questions, to your questions, and maybe we will cross the 1 hour line here. But this was the webinar, so I hope you you just hang on a bit and stay with us for a few questions, and hopefully you have some also.
Thank you, Søren, for the presentation. Yes, we are now in our Q&A part of the webinar, and we're moving on to the first question right away, which is, on a pay-per-hour basis, how do you control the amount of hours that your new remote developer has worked? How can you audit that the 80 hours that he or she reported are real? Interesting question.
It's actually hi Leo again, and I think it is actually a super great question. Allan touched upon it about the entire trust part, and I think you just have to realize that you cannot do that. You cannot audit that the 80 hours are completely real. But I think this is also, you can say, you are getting into a big ocean here with all types of people from all types of countries. So one thing is, I would say, to get to know them in the hiring process. And Allan talked a bit about it, and potentially if you do a test, then make sure that you do evaluation with them personally in interviews about the test. So you make sure that it's not somebody else who actually made the test. So that is one way of securing, you can say, that the skills are there. And how can you then audit that the 80 hours they report are right? I think step one is to get to know them. Actually get to know them in one-to-one meetings, talk about not just work, but also other things, and build that type of trust. The direct manager should do that. And second is to go away from focusing on process to focusing on results. You need to focus on the results that this developer is doing. What they have produced in these 80 hours, does that make sense for you? And is that a good contribution for 80 hours? That has to be your focus. So you can say the old school of working where people, they maybe without being productive at all, have to be in an office or so, you have to get away from that. And that I think you should, whether you do this or not, but especially in remote organizations where you cannot check that they are actually sitting in front of their computer. So that is my answer. Get to know them in the hiring process. Get to know them even better when you work with them, and then measure on outcome and help them.
It's a bit about culture and trust, and the mix of those two, you could say. We have our second question. Is pay per job done with a closed budget the only solution to this problem? I think this relates to the first question.
My answer is definitely no. I think actually it's not a solution to this problem. It can be a solution if you have, you can say, limited and projects that are easy to scope. Then it can be definitely a solution to agree on what needs to be delivered and then have a fixed price. But in larger development projects, it is simply too hard to set the scope. And that is what you can say, this is the entire reason why agile development is so popular, right? Because in a way it would be much nicer if you could just agree on the exact scope and then have a fixed price, and then they deliver that, and then everything is perfect. But it's just that experience has proven again and again and again that if we're talking about more complex projects, then it's not possible. It's really not possible for you to define the requirements to the details that is actually needed, because one requirement can have multiple solutions, and then you say, yeah, but that is obvious that should be included. Then the developer say that is not obvious to me, and then you have all these, you can say, scope discussions that will take a lot of your time, and that is the core of the reason why agile development is the new normal, and not scoping projects and having fixed prices. So I would say if you're doing this in a team with the remote developers, then I would say in general, you should forget about trying to scope and price tasks. And I'm sure Allan would agree, actually. I know he would. Yeah.
Then we have another one. How many remote consultants approximately Brightwell Group has in the radar or database or network? And what kind of competencies and technologies do they have different levels of experience?
Yes, a lot of questions in one. I would say we have different channels. We have, for instance, a mailing list with 13,000 consultants on. We have a platform called Onsiter.com that we own with about 10,000 consultants on, and we have other means. We use also external platforms. Like we, for instance, have the best subscriptions on LinkedIn, but we also use other platforms for our recruiting process. So it is not an either or. Some, you can say, are in systems we own, some are in systems that we use but we do not own, and some of them are also, you can say, in our personal network. We have people in Right People Group that has a huge personal network among. So you can say our approach is basically that we try to get the broadest reach out in the market, and then we do a quality assurance process, a selection, to narrow it down to a few people that we think are the most relevant for you, and then you do the final quality assurance. And to answer the last part of the question, what kind of competence, technologies, and different levels of experience, I would say we primarily work with highly experienced people, but we have the possibility also of finding not so experienced people. But when working remotely, you have to be ready for it if you want to go that way. So it's primarily highly experienced people, but it's all kind of competence and technologies. And that, you can say, is also our skill as a company, that we don't just have 100 people that work for us, and then if you have a need, then we find the best one for that. No, we go out in the entire market and find the best person out there at all for the specific need you have. So we take a starting point in your requirements, and that is also how you should specify requirements to us. Say, this is the perfect match, and then we will probably say, Leo will say, and he has done that many times, but what are the most important things? Because often, that candidate that has experience with these 15 technologies is not there, and then we also have to see what is most important, and then we will prioritize based on that. That was a long answer to a long question.
Something I also like to emphasize to the clients that I'm in touch with is that there's something also about proactive contacting of people that we don't even know yet, which is a big part of our work. There's one more question. What would you say to the companies that strongly prefer their staff to be on-site and thus miss out on the possibility for a more broad pool of talent?
Yeah, it's a good question, because I don't think my answer will be as the person expected to be, because I would actually say that it is perfectly okay, and for some companies it's the right thing to do. Like, I don't think building a distributed remote organization is just the right answer for all companies. Like, for instance, English skills is a thing. The attitude towards the fact that you can actually trust employees in that way, that is another thing. So I think it is a superpower if you're ready to do it. Then it's amazing. Then for me it's the only way to go. But it also requires that you're ready to do it, that you are actually willing to do these things that I mentioned in the webinar, etc. So I would and magic can happen in small teams that are work together on site and are super strong, right? In software development, they can build amazing things. So it's not that I think, distributed teams is the only way to build an organization. It's definitely in Right People Group for our own software development. There's no doubt for us it's the right way to go. And for many customers, I think it is the way to go. But it's not for everyone.
Oh, there is actually one more question. Do you have a recommendation for what test to use? I think this goes for the testing the professionals, perhaps.
Yeah. And I wish you could say that I also searched for that. Like, can we just find one good test and then you get a result, and that shows is this a good software developer or a bad software developer. But as a lot of things in life, it's not that simple. So I think I would recommend to actually do what Allan does in their company, and that is to make them do a relevant, solve a relevant task, a coding task, and then discuss with them in the interview, why did they choose to do like this? What is their attitude towards software development, to architecture? Have that enlightened discussion with key employees. That is the best way to go, in my opinion.
One more coming up. What do you recommend if you have employees that are not good at English?
Yeah, I actually mentioned it shortly before that if those people are having a lot of interfaces with the remote English-speaking developers, then I don't think it's the right way to go for you. I mean, but if they are in another place of the organization and they're not really they have no or very little interaction, then it can be fine still. But the people that interacts with the remote people, they have to be fairly good in English. Otherwise, I mean, if you look at the remote developers we have hired ourselves for our remote for our product Onsiter.com, they are actually not super skilled in English, all of them. They're just super good developers. So we have more, you can say, they're much better in written communication than in oral communication. So that is also, you can say, that is also a way, you can say, to do it, that you have more written communication, maybe that easier. But I think you should have at least a certain level of English skills to make this a good idea.
I agree on those points. That seems to be the last question. Thank you everyone for joining in today. It was a pleasure to have the webinar with you. And thanks also to Søren and Allan for their comments. If there's any questions that you have after this webinar, feel free to reach out to Søren and me personally as well. We'll be happy to answer those questions and help you with whatever things you might have regarding today's topic or sourcing in general. But thanks again, and if there's any final words, I'll give you the chance to give final comments, Søren.
I think I've said so many words, Leo, but thanks to you for having me in this webinar, and thanks to you also for joining. And I can only confirm what Leo say. We would love to have a dialogue with you. If you have interesting projects or anything else, then feel free to reach out. But thanks for joining, and hope to see you again.
Bye-bye.
Bye.